Good evening, everyone. I am Paky Eckerström, and today I will tell you about my current research, extreme heavy metal music as a political and religious transgression in Iran and Saudi Arabia. Heavy metal music is generally considered haram, a sin, according to Islamic law. Thus, my research investigates how extreme heavy metal musicians use this music as a transgressive tool, and how this transgressive act produce resistance. A common premise in the study of heavy metal music is that this genre is not defiant anymore. And I agree if we look at mostly of the Western societies. For example, in Finland, heavy metal is basically pop culture here. However, in Muslim majority countries, especially the most conservative ones, extreme heavy metal musicians can be charged for very harsh crimes, such as blasphemy and apostasy. And this was the case for the hardcore Iranian metal band Confess. Arash and Nikan were arrested when they were barely 20 on November 9th, 2015. The band spent 1 year and a half in prison, partially in solitary confinement. They paid bail about 30,000 euro, and waiting for trial, they left the country. They were helped by the association ICORN, and now they live in Norway as political refugees. While in Norway, they received the result of their appeal, 14 and a half years in prison combined. And in addition, Nikan, the band leader, was sentenced to 74 lashes. They had a lot of charges, but I want to bring your attention to blasphemy and propaganda against the system, because these were the very serious charges, as they carry sentences that can go from many years in prison to capital punishment. So why their art was considered blasphemous? Well, of course, the lyrical content was one of the reasons. However, it's very interesting that during trial, the artwork of their music was found blasphemous. Here, I put two examples for you. In the first one, you can see the cover art of the song You Will Pay Back. And as you can see, there is a man that is dressed half as an imam and half as a political man. Nikan told me that this was his way to underline how in Iran religious and political power overlap. In the second cover, you can see a hand that caresses some thorns. Now, as many of you might know, the Islamic tradition prohibits the depiction of God, the Prophet, and religious figures, and that includes body parts. If we go to Saudi Arabia, Al-Namrud, which is an anti-religious, anti-Islamic black metal band, has for over 10 years published transgressive music. The band members' faces and names are unknown. If found, they could be charged for blasphemy and apostasy. Nevertheless, the band has been published CD for over 10 years, and they are very well known into the underground scene. In conclusion, with this said, can we think that popular culture and extreme heavy metal cannot be a tool for resistance? Well, I suggest that censorship engage with transgression and resistance. Thus, if we study this music in new context, we can gain a lot of insight into topics such as blasphemy, but resistance, and anti-authoritarian identities. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for such a nice presentation. How did you come across this theme?
Everyone asks me that. It's pretty peculiar. Well, I would say that I've been always drawn to very controversial topics, and especially when it's about human rights in relation with religion. And plus, I've been a music journalist for many years, so when I got to know about the band Confess and the fact that they were charged for blasphemy and apostasy, at the same time, I was looking for a topic for a PhD, and I thought that there was a gap, and I wanted to fill that gap.
And what kind of data do you use in your research?
Interviews, qualitative research, of course. So interviews with the fans and musicians, and especially the primary case studies are Confess and Al Namrud.
And with during these Corona times, it's probably easy to do those interviews, or is it?
Oh no, it is easy. Of course, I cannot travel to Iran
Yeah.
and Saudi Arabia and do those interviews, so it has to be done through Zoom, Skype, and so on.
Cool. And how did the metal music enter these countries with heavy censorship?
Well, this, I have to say, was the most interesting part of my research, because heavy metal music has existed since the 80s in both countries. Now, the music was smuggled in. In the 80s, cassettes were smuggled into the country illegally. They were sold in kilos. And then during the 90s, of course, satellites were a very good tool for fans to get to know the international act. But I have to say that the most important thing, I guess, was internet in the 2000s, because fans and musicians found a way to build a community and find some kind of freedom where to share music. Some of my participants told me that they will put the webcam in chat and play guitars with the other hidden in their bedroom. But also an important tool to actually live this life have been the private parties. Now, those are illegal parties that fans and musicians organize. And the police, of course, they can know about this party, storm in and arrest the participants. Nevertheless, they are still organized. And their fans listen to music, they drink a few beers, they live this lifestyle, as some local bands can perform. And you have to think that still in Iran and Saudi Arabia, every artist, not only musicians and heavy metal musicians, need to ask permission from the ministry. For example, in Iran, the Ministry of Culture and Islamic Guidance asks for the lyrics to be translated into Farsi, and also for the band to send a video of their performance. Now you can understand easily that heavy metal bands do not get permission. However, we have also to admit that in Saudi Arabia there are some steps that are being taken. Thanks to Vision 2030, which is a framework for the kingdom to rely less on oil, I would say, and more on tourism and entertainment. Thus, in 2019, the band Creative Waste made history playing the first legal metal concert in Saudi Arabia. Nevertheless, for bands such as Al Namrud, who are very vocal, anti-religion, maybe the fight is still a long one.
Interesting. And what was the blasphemy conviction for the Iranian band Confess?
As I said, in total, they had 14 and a half years in prison. Now, this included 5 years each for offending the sanctity of Islam, which means blasphemy. Now, according to Nikan, the way he explained to me is that they didn't get capital punishment for almost, I would say, a loop in the Islamic law. It was proven during trial that they offended God. Mm-hmm. Now, God can forgive you, but if you offend the prophet is dead. He cannot defend himself. Thus, if they would have been proven to have offended the prophet, maybe the result would have been much worse.
Okay. And how popular is heavy metal in Iran and Saudi Arabia? For instance, how many bands are there at the moment?
It is, I would say it is very popular. Of course, because of media constructed stereotypes, we cannot think that in Iran and Saudi Arabia, kids, teenagers, they do listen to this music, although it is considered satanic in their country. But for example, Nikan has told me that many times he will be on the bus and he will hear the person sitting next to him listen to heavy metal through his headphones. It is fairly popular. Now there are, I will say in Iran, 94 bands, and in Saudi Arabia much less, about 10. And I acknowledge that those are very small numbers, but we have to think how extraordinary it is that there are even metal bands there.
And how do the musicians describe their attitudes and reasons for creating heavy metal music under the strict censorship?
Well, as here, some they just love heavy metal music because of their sound. So they might like the sound and they don't want to necessarily protest through this music. However, we have to think that context and perception are the key terms here. Because despite of the value that you attribute to the music you love is still controversial and perceived as illegal in your country. But however, I have to say that through my data collection, I understood that the vast majority of the bands in both countries use this music as a way to purge their anger and to try to change something, to promote a change.
And how well known are the bands you have studied abroad?
For example, Kopfes and Almarud, they are very popular,
Yeah.
very, very popular.
Thanks a lot and good luck with the rest of the research.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.